Christ is risen. Christos anesti. I hope everyone had a wonderful Holy Week and Pascha. And for those of you who are chanters, I'm sure that you are glad to have some time to rest now after Pascha, after Holy Week. But let's talk about something that you as a chanter may have encountered or may have wondered about, especially during this busy Holy Week, and that is this concept of opening your throat when you sing. You hear this from many people, how that when you chant, when you sing, you want to have an open throat. So what does that mean? Let's actually talk about that. So just for a little bit of background information, the way that I explain things and when I teach something on my channel, this is after I have gathered a ton of information from many different sources, from professional teachers, from very trusted people. And I don't just take from one source, I take from many sources and I implement it myself and I see what works and what doesn't work. Some things work for me, some things work better for others, and they don't work for me, but I'm going to share what has worked for me and what my understanding is of this concept of opening your throat when you sing. And the thing is, you want to be careful when you borrow from vocal teachers that are not Byzantine chanters, right? So though I have borrowed information from other musicians, I have also adapted it so that it applies more specifically to Byzantine chanting. So for example, there's a very common chanting school, and they will take basically the teachings from, I think her name is Jo Estil or something, and she's not a chanter, she is a secular musician. And if you're going to take information and teachings and techniques from these secular singers, you have to be able to adapt it to Byzantine chanting, because Byzantine chanting is not the same as secular Western music. It sounds very different, and there are differences. There are similarities, and there are also differences. So let's talk about that. So first, let's talk about the misconceptions surrounding the whole concept of opening your throat. And the biggest problem with when people talk about opening your throat when you sing is that we can't see the muscles of the throat. First of all, we don't even know, a lot of people don't even know what is known as, like, when we say the throat, like, what are we actually talking about? That's the first step. So the term throat could mean many different things, and it's easy to misunderstand what's actually being spoken about. And there's different parts to what we would call the throat. So there's the esophagus down here, and the problem is when we talk about throat, we often think of what's down here. So down here we have the esophagus, we have the trachea, but up here, a little bit farther up, we have what we would call the pharynx, right? Especially up here, the upper pharynx in the sinus cavities. So what are we actually talking about when we talk about the throat? First of all, we're not talking necessarily about the esophagus, and we're not talking about the trachea. We're actually talking about what is kind of farther up, what we would call the pharynx. And the problem when we tell someone to open their throat, we're really talking about the pharynx. And the problem with the pharynx is most people don't know what the pharynx is, and if they do, the issue is they cannot see the pharynx. And because of that, they cannot know the sensation of opening the pharynx. They don't have, in many cases, they don't actually have direct control over the pharynx because you can't see it, right? You can barely, in a sense, you cannot feel it either. So the problem with telling someone to do something with a muscle is, in this case, you cannot really see or feel that muscle. If someone tells you to flex your bicep, that's way easier. You just flex your bicep. And then if they say, okay, relax your bicep, you relax it. And you can't take that same logic and use it for the throat. So that's a very important distinction. So first of all, the throat is not what we commonly think. It's not that when we talk about the throat in our singing, it's not necessarily down here. This is more your pharynx, this is more your esophagus and trachea. We're talking about more up here in the sinus cavities, in the, what we would call the pharynx. Because when we sing, it's very important that we have something called the correct resonance. Resonance is kind of where is our voice felt. Because we want, as chanters, of course, we want our voice to project. We want our voice to be very clearly heard by people. And therefore, it's important where the voice resonates. So we actually want it to resonate not down here, not back here, but up here. And I'll get into that in a bit more detail. So the problem, the misconception, a major issue with this idea of opening your throat is when people tell you that the best way to open your throat is to yawn. To yawn, right? What's yawning? When you yawn, it's very easy to feel or to think that the sensation is felt down here, because often it is. If I yawn, I'm almost opening this area of my throat. And that it very easily leads to a misunderstanding. So what's going to happen if I just yawn? If I try to simulate, try to copy a yawn, you see what just happened? I tried to move my larynx and my larynx was stuck. I yawned. I tried to imitate an actual yawn and my larynx didn't move. So what happened there? I'm using muscular action and I'm actually keeping my larynx stuck. So that's a bit of an issue. That's the opposite of opening your throat, because now I'm creating tension on my actual voice box. If my larynx is free, if my larynx is inactive and free and relaxed, I should be able to move it back and forth or whatever. It should be loose. Whereas when I just yawned, my larynx was stuck. So that's a huge issue with the advice of yawning. Yawning, the sensation of yawning, does not necessarily open your throat. So how do you actually open your throat? So there's people that say to think of, let's say, spreading this area, spreading out. They'll tell you to smile, and it takes your cheeks and kind of lifts them up, right? So you'll hear often some people will say to open your throat you should smile and you should spread this area. And what they're doing is they're basically spreading the throat, opening it horizontally, right? So I know chanters who will smile when they sing. The problem with that is they're doing a horizontal sort of opening, stretching or spreading the throat in a sense. That's not necessarily what we want, and I could prove that by asking you to listen to or watch some professional chanters. Watch some videos of them chanting. Tell me if they smile, if they have this sort of smile, this sort of horizontal spreading of their mouth as they chant. Do they? Because I would say there are no professional chanters who actually do that. So as we can see, like a lot of this advice, the common advice of yawning, smile, kind of spread the mouth, a lot of this is very, very misleading, and I want to clarify what's the best way to actually, we're going to figure out what is the best way to actually open your throat. So, in order to explain this, I want to change the way you think about opening your throat, because everyone tells you to open your throat as if it's an action. They talk about it as an action, right? And the problem with creating an action in this area is you cannot see the muscles in this area. You can't see your pharynx, and because of that, you can't really feel it. You don't know what it is that you're opening. You don't know what it is that you're, when you try to make space in your throat, sometimes you don't know quite what you're doing because, like I said, you can't feel and see these muscles. You don't have direct control over these muscles in the way that I would have direct control over my bicep. That's a lot more clear and obvious. So what often happens is you are making an action in an effort to open your throat because that's what they're telling you to do, and it's backfiring. The perfect example of that is the yawn. I tried to yawn. It feels like a yawn, but this is literally stuck. My larynx is literally stuck, so that can't be right. That can't be good. And there's a lot of things that can be misunderstood. Like I said, you don't want to create resonance or space down here necessarily. You want to create space up here. So what's the first step in doing that? How can we change our mindset about relaxing and opening the throat? So the first thing is we're going to change our mind from thinking of it as an action, and instead we're going to think of it as an inaction, right? Instead of doing something, we're going to undo. And what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, I gotta be careful here, YouTube. Let's say I lift my hand up, right? I lift my arm up. My arm's up in the air. This is a muscular action. I'm forcing my hand up, right? If they say, if someone tells me put your hand down, what do? Do I need to think about the action of putting my hand down, or what if I just do nothing? What if I just let go or just undo the action of putting my hand up? Excuse me. My hand just dropped. My arm just dropped because of gravity. It's not like I did something to make it drop, like I technically did, but really it was just a matter of undoing. I had it up, and I just let go, and it dropped. That's a lot more what it means to open your throat. It means to take the action away from your throat. You want the throat and the jaw to be completely inactive. And this is going to help it to relax. The same as if you were asleep, right? If you're asleep, what's your throat doing? If you're asleep and you're snoring, it's inactive. It's not doing anything. You're not trying to do anything with it. So I want you to think about opening your throat in that way. That's the first step. Because like I said, we can't tell people to use muscular action when they don't quite understand what we're actually doing in this area, because like I said, you can't see it. You can't see what you're trying to open. So therefore it's hard to actually understand the sensation. It's hard to feel what you're actually trying to do. So let's think of it as inaction rather than action, and undoing something, like my hand up, rather than trying to do something. Along the same lines, we want to try not to think about opening the throat, right? Because our idea of opening the throat might not correspond to the reality, the physiological reality of the throat and the pharynx being open and relaxed. So instead of thinking about opening the throat when we chant, right? Let's say we have a high note and we think, I need my throat to be really open. What's a much better way to handle this? Instead, just think the vowel. So what I mean by that is don't think about what shape your throat should be for the vowel, because people talk about this a lot, shaping the vocal tract for the vowel or whatever. Don't think about what to do with your throat in regards to the vowel. Just think about the vowel itself. Mentally think about the vowel that you are about to sing, right? If you're chanting, let's just a random example, the cherubic hymn, and let's say it's in Greek, right? So the first vowel is going to be E. E ta cheruvim mystikos, right? So the first vowel is going to be E, and you're probably going to hold that for a while. Instead of thinking, what do I do with my throat? Just think the vowel E. Just think it mentally. And then just let your voice naturally pronounce that vowel as if you were speaking. That's the first step to helping your throat to relax and to open. So think of it not as an open throat, but as a relaxed throat, an inactive throat. Now, if we're going to take away all the action from the throat, we need something else to be doing the work for our voice, because we don't want to use these muscles, right? Our larynx is right here. We don't want to use these muscles when we are singing. All of our power, our range, our volume, we don't want it to necessarily come from here. Of course, this is our vocal cords are going to produce the original sort of sound, but our vocal cords are not what amplifies our voice and what helps it carry, right? So another part of the body needs to be doing the work if we want everything from here up, to be completely inactive. So what are we going to use to accomplish this? We're going to use our breathing muscles, and we're going to use our diaphragm. So if you haven't seen my video, I made a video called Parts of the Body Used in Singing. Definitely watch that video where I talk about the diaphragm. And we want to use a few different things when we sing. We want to use our diaphragm, and we want to use deep breathing. Again, I talk about this again in my video, Parts of the Body Used in Singing, where we have basically two types of breathing. We have our everyday breathing, which is like when we're walking and we're at the grocery store or whatever. This is what we would call shallow chest breathing or clavicular breathing, right? And this is very shallow breathing that we just use in our chest. And this is not the breathing we want to use when we sing. When we sing, we want to use deep breathing that essentially engages the diaphragm. So we want to breathe into our lower back. We want to feel the breath very deep in our body, very low, right? And there's a law that says for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. What happens when we breathe deeply, it takes the pressure off of this area, and it relaxes everything around the throat and the jaw. So we don't actually need to do anything here if we breathe correctly. Think of it as a megaphone. Some people try to open the throat horizontally, as if there's a megaphone right here, horizontal. But we want to think of the throat being open almost like a vertical megaphone. So it's vertical, right? So we want all of this to open up and to be inactive. And our voice is going to resonate up here. And in order to accomplish that, we want to take all the pressure off of this area so it's not doing anything. And we want to give the breathing muscles down here deep into our body. We want to give these muscles the work, to have them do the work. So up here we don't have to do anything. And of course, there's a lot involved with breathing correctly. because I say take a deep breath, but you also want to keep that breath deep into the body, deep in the body. You don't want it leaking up, because excess breath that leaks through the vocal cords that's not converted to sound is actually not good for your voice. So of course I need to make a specific separate video just on breathing, because I don't really have time to cover it here. But breathing is important, but you have to breathe correctly, and that is you have to breathe deeply, and you have to keep the breath deep into the body so that it's not leaking up here and it's not almost essentially choking you, right? You want it very deep, you want it held and contained, and that's a video for another time. But breathing correctly opens this whole area. Now, how does this apply to chanting? Because you may say chanting has a very deep sort of, most chanters have this very deep, resonant, full voice that maybe is a bit different from contemporary music in many ways. And that is true. So, first of all, I do want to state that there is an openness that chanters will create with their voice. And it's basically, this is taught in steps, right? The first step, before you do anything else, is you want to make sure you're not creating any muscular action here that's going to actually work against you, that's going to backfire, like I said, with the yawning and some of the stuff that actually causes tension, right? Another thing is opening the mouth really wide and forcing the mouth open. What happens if I open my mouth? Again, my larynx is stuck. We don't want that. So we want to, first step is, of course, avoid muscular actions that will work against us. But once we have learned to completely relax these muscles and to not involve these muscles with our chanting, there is a space that chanters create, and it's a space in the pharynx, basically. It's up here. It's not down here, but it's up here. And they create it as a sort of, basically they let it happen. They don't make it happen, right? They allow it to happen as they chant. They allow for some space up here. And this is learned, ideally in person with a teacher. But what they're doing is they're creating space and resonance up here. And the way Byzantine chanting sounds, many people have noticed, is it has specifically a resonance in this area. Now, it's not a resonance that comes out of the nose, but it is a resonance in the nasal cavity, sinus cavity area. But it's very important to remember that it's not actually coming out of the nose. And a good way to test if your voice is like nasal in the sense that it's coming out of your nose is if you're chanting and you plug your nose and your voice changes. That's not a good sign. Of course, there's nasal consonants like M, N, where those sounds momentarily are going to come out your nose. But generally speaking, if you're chanting correctly, you should be able to plug your nose and the sound doesn't change. In other words, the sound's not coming out of your nose. However, it is resonating in this area. It's a very important distinction. So when you hear chanters chanting, they have inaction down here. They don't have muscular action, but they allow for extra space in the pharynx area and a resonance in the sinus area. And that's kind of what gives Byzantine chanting its unique, very calming sound. And by the way, many people will talk about Byzantine chanting as being nasal. And it's not nasal in the sense that it comes out the nose. Like I said, we don't want it coming out of the nose. If anything, it's nasal in the sense of hyponasality. Hyponasality means nothing's coming out of the nose, almost like you have a cold. It's very subtle, it's very slight. But the irony is the resonance is up here, but it's not coming out of the nose. There's two types of nasality. Think of it this way. There's hypernasality, where the sound is coming out of the nose. We don't want that. Like if I'm chanting in a hypernasal way and I plug my nose, my voice is going to stop. My voice is going to it's going to change dramatically. And think of this as the resonance being, of course I should do a whole other video on like resonance and stuff, but think of the resonance as being just a little too low, right? It's down here and it's coming out of the nose. Whereas if we're chanting correctly, the resonance should be a little bit higher. It should be up here. So it's resonating here, but it's not coming out of the nose. That's really important. So, how do we actually learn this? How do we know we're doing it correctly? So with everything, with singing, we want to go off primarily based on our sensations rather than how it sounds. You don't want to, when you're learning, you don't want to focus too much on how it sounds. Of course, how it sounds is important, but what really matters is how you are producing the sound. If you're producing something that sounds nice, but you have tension and you are struggling in any way, then that's not good, because eventually you're going to cause damage to your voice. So we want to think about what's the sensation when we're chanting correctly, when we're doing things right, when we're not involving these muscles in an unhealthy way. So a good way to know that you are opening and relaxing your throat is that the voice is completely free and it's uninhibited throughout its range. So you go from the low notes to the high notes, and you don't feel stuck. You don't feel like you're choking, right? It's light, it's free, it's easy, it's uninhibited. It shouldn't be difficult to get the sound out. Now, that being said, there's a lot more to actually chanting correctly and using your voice correctly. It's not just a matter of opening your throat. But a good sign that your throat is open is that your sound is easy and light and free. And conversely, if you feel like you have to push, if you have to struggle to get the sound out, if you are losing your voice easily, especially for the high notes, if you feel like you have to push those high notes and you have to put a lot of effort and strain, most likely you are using these throat muscles in a way that you shouldn't. Perhaps you are trying to open it, like that yawning that I demonstrated, but it's backfiring and you're actually creating tension down here. Perhaps you're taking very shallow breaths, you're taking a lot of breath in, but it's not going deep enough and it's kind of here and it's choking you, right? And it's causing tension. And a lot of it also could be psychological, nerves, overthinking, and all of this stuff is another video for another time. But there's many things that could affect this openness of your throat, and it's important to learn to relax your throat at all times. Now, here's a simple test. If you are chanting, and this is just a test, I'm not saying you should do this when you are chanting in church, but when you're practicing. When you're chanting the higher notes, not super high, but just kind of going up to the higher notes, you should be able to slightly lift your head up just a little bit as you're chanting. Try it. Lift your head up just a little bit. If the sound cuts off, if your voice cuts off, you can be pretty sure you're using these throat muscles and you're tensing up. And that's not good. The sound should still continue even if you move your head a little bit. So that's a good test to kind of know if you're using those throat muscles. So, we've talked about opening your throat, and hopefully now you have a new understanding of what this actually means. So, I hope this was helpful. I hope you can implement this in the upcoming services for, Pascha services and Pentecost coming up. It's gonna be here sooner than you think. So if you're interested in working with me, if you want to learn more, if you want to go more in depth with some of this stuff, just click the link in the description to schedule a free lesson. Christos Anesti, Christ is risen. God bless you.